Good morning. Today is Wednesday, May 13th, and we are going to read Chapter 3 of 1984. We're on Part 2. If you need the summary, we have seen that Winston and now known as Julia, they found a little hideaway in the woods where there's no microphones, and we found a little bit of symbolism in the birds singing because it was a sign that everything was completely safe. That the bird was singing for just to sing. There wasn't a mate or a potential mate around, and there wasn't a rival. So we have concluded that is what's going on. All right, let's begin. We can come here once again, said Julia. It's generally safe to use any hideout twice, but not for another month or two, of course. As soon as she woke up, her demeanor had changed. She had become alert and businesslike, put her clothes on, knotted the scarlet sash around her waist, and began arranging the details of the journey home. It seemed natural to leave this to her. She obviously had a practical cunning which Winston lacked, and she also seemed to have an exhaustive knowledge of the countryside around London, stored away from innumerable community hikes. The route she gave him was quite different from the one which he had come, and brought him out at a different railway station. Never go home the same way you went out, she said, as though enunciating an important general principle. She would leave first, and Winston was to wait half an hour before following her. She had named a place where they could meet after work, 4 evenings hence. It was a street in one of the poor quarters, where there was an open market, which was generally crowded and noisy. She would be hanging about among the stalls, pretending to be in search of shoelaces or sewing thread. If she judged that the coast was clear, she would blow her nose when he approached. Otherwise, he was to walk past her without recognition. But with luck, in the middle of the crowd, it would be safe to talk for a quarter of an hour and arrange another meeting. And now I must go, she said, as soon as he had mastered his instructions. I'm due back at 19:30. I've got to put in 2 hours for the Junior Anti-Sex League, handing out leaflets or something. Isn't it bloody? Give me a brush down, would you? Have I got any twigs in my hair? Are you sure? Then goodbye, my love, goodbye. She flung herself into his arms, kissed him almost violently, and a moment later she pushed her way through the saplings and disappeared into the wood with very little noise. Even now he had not found out her surname or her address. However, it made no difference, for it was inconceivable that they would ever meet indoors or exchange any kind of written communication. As it happened, they never went back to the clearing in the wood. During the month of May, there were only one further occasion on which they actually succeeded in making love. That was in another hiding place known to Julia, the belfry of a ruinous church in an almost deserted stretch of the country, where an atomic bomb had fallen 30 years earlier. It was a good hiding place once you got there, but getting there was very dangerous. For the rest, they could only meet in the streets, in a different place every evening, and never more than half an hour at a time. In the street, it was usually possible to talk, after a fashion. As they drift down in the crowded pavements, not quite abreast, but never looking at one another, they carried on a curious, intermittent conversation which flicked on and off like beams of a lighthouse, suddenly nipped into silence by the approach of a party uniform or the proximity of a telescreen, then taken up again minutes later in the middle of a sentence, then abruptly cut short as soon as they parted at the agreed spot, then continued almost without introduction the following day. Julia appeared to be quite used to this kind of conversation, which she called talking by installments. She was also surprisingly adept at speaking without moving her lips. Just once in almost a month of nightly meetings, they had managed to exchange a kiss. They were passing in silence down a street. Julia would never speak when they were away from the main streets. When there was a deafening roar, the earth heaved and the air darkened. And Winston found himself lying on his side, bruised and terrified. A rocket bomb must have dropped quite near at hand. Suddenly, he became aware of Julia's face within centimeters of his own, deathly white as chalk. Her lips were white. She was dead. He clasped her against him and found that he was kissing a live, warm face. But there was some powdery stuff that got in the way of his lips. Both of their faces were thickly coated with plaster. There were evenings when they reached their rendezvous and then had to walk past one another without a sign because a patrol had just come around the corner or a helicopter was hovering overhead. Even if it had been less dangerous, it would still have been difficult to find time to meet. Winston's working week was 60 hours. Julia's was even longer, and their free days varied according to the pressure of work and did not often coincide. Julia, in any case, seldom had an evening completely free. She felt an astonishing amount of time in attending lectures and demonstrations, distributing literature for the Anti-Sex League, preparing banners for Hate Week, making collections for the savings campaign, and such like activities. It paid, she said. It was camouflage. If you kept the small rules, you could break the big ones. She even induced Winston to mortgage yet another one of his evenings by enrolling himself for a part-time munition work, which was done voluntarily by zealous party members. So, once every week, Winston spent 4 hours of paralyzing boredom screwing together small bits of metal, which were probably parts of bomb fuses, in a draughty, ill-lit workshop where the knocking of hammers mingled drearily with the music of the telescreens. So, what we're saying right now is that Winston and Julia participating more for Winston to remain out of sight or suspicion. I think I spelled that right. We're also going to highlight this right here of how long their work week is, because that goes back to like one of the mottos that slavery is freedom. Because in our culture, we work traditionally about 40 hours per week. So that means that we're sectioned out to 8 hours, ideally, of sleep, 8 hours of work, and then 8 hours of free time. But with 60 hours a week, that would be about 12-hour work days. Twelve-hour work days, 8 hours of sleep, and 4 hours of free time. But as we can see, there's not a whole lot of free time. That's what it would be on average, but my assumption is that they probably have it so that they are working probably about every day of the week. So that would average to about like, trying to think, math. About like 8.5 hours of work every day. And then plus the 8 hours of sleep, and then the 4 hours of like quote unquote free time. When they met in the church tower, the gaps in their fragmentary conversation were filled up. It was a blazing afternoon. The air in the little square chamber above the bells was hot and stagnant, and the smell overpoweringly of pitch and dung. They sat talking for hours on the dusty, twig-littered floor, or on one or other of them getting up from time to time to cast a glance through the arrow slits to make sure no one was coming. Julia was 26 years old. She lived in a hostel with 30 other girls. Always in the stink of women. How I hate women, she said parenthetically. And she worked, as he guessed, on the novel-writing machines in the fiction department. She enjoyed her work, which consisted chiefly in running and servicing a powerful but tricky electric motor. She was not clever, but was fond of using her hands and felt at home with machinery. She could describe the whole process of composing a novel, from the general directive issued by the planning committee down to the final touching up of by the rewrite squad. But she was not interested in the finished product. She didn't care much for reading, she said. Books were just a commodity that had to be produced, like jam or bootlaces. She had no memories of anything before the early 60s, and the only person she had ever known who talked frequently of the days before the revolution was a grandfather who disappeared when she was 8. At school, she had been captain of the hockey team and won the gymnastics trophy 2 years running. She had been a troop leader in the Spies and a branch secretary in the youth league before joining the junior anti-sex league. She had also borne an excellent character. She had even, an infallible mark of good reputation, been picked out to work in the pornosec, the subsection of the fiction department, which turned out cheap pornography for distribution among the proles. It was nicknamed Muck House by the people who worked in it, she remarked. There she had remained for a year, helping to produce booklets and sealed packets with titles like Spanky Stories or One Night in a Girl's School, to be bought furtively by proletarian youths who were under the impression that they were buying something illegal. "What are the books like?" said Winston curiously. "Oh, ghastly rubbish. They're boring, really. They only have 6 plots, but they swap them round a bit. Of course, I was only on the kaleidoscopes. I was never in the rewrite squad. I'm not literary, dear. Not even enough for that." He learned with astonishment that all the workers in the porno sect, except for the heads of the department, were girls. The theory was that men, whose sex instincts were less controllable than those of women, were in greater danger of being corrupted by the filth they handled. We're just gonna... They don't even like having married women there, she added. Girls are always supposed to be pure. Here's one who isn't, anyway. She had her first love affair when she was 16, with a party member of 60 who later committed suicide to avoid arrest. And a good job, too, said Julia. Otherwise, they'd have my name out of him when he confessed. Since then, there had been various others. Life as she saw it was quite simple. You wanted a good time. They, meaning the party, wanted to stop you from having it. If you broke the rules as best you could. She seemed to think that it was natural that they should want to rob you out of your pleasures, as that you would want to avoid being caught. She hated the party, and said so in the crudest words, but she made no general criticism of it. Except where it touched upon her own life, she had no interest in party doctrine. He noticed that she never used newspeak words except the ones that had passed into everyday use. She had never heard of the Brotherhood and refused to believe in its existence. Any kind of organized revolt against the party, which was bound to be a failure, struck her as stupid. The clever thing was to break the rules and stay alive all the same. He wondered vaguely how many others like her there might be in the younger generation, people who had grown up in a world of the revolution, knowing nothing else, accepting the party as something unalterable, like the sky, not rebelling against authority, but simply evading it, as a rabbit dodges a dog. So we have a new perspective. With Julia is giving us a different perspective, whereas Winston has shown us about the Brotherhood and talked about any rebellions that have come or will come in defiance of the party, which is compliance. A mixture of compliance and rebellion. She wants to make sure that she stays under their radar, that she appears to be an upstanding citizen, but at the end of the day, she wants to break the rules and not really follow what the party wants her to follow. They did not discuss the possibility of getting married. It was too remote to be worth thinking about. No imaginable committee would ever sanction such a marriage, even if Catherine, Winston's wife, would somehow have been got rid of. It was hopeless even as a daydream. What was she like, your wife? Said Julia. She was, do you know the Newspeak Good Thinkful? meaning naturally orthodox, incapable of thinking of a bad thought. No, I didn't know the word, but I know the kind of person, right enough. He began telling her the story of his married life, but curiously enough, she appeared to know the essential parts of it already. She described to him, almost as though she had seen or felt it, the stiffening of Catherine's body as soon as he touched her, the way in which she seemed to be pushing him from her with all of her strength, even when her arms were clasped tightly around him. With Julia, he felt no difficulty in talking about such things. Catherine, in any case, had long ceased to be a painful memory and became merely a distasteful one. I could have stood it if it hadn't been for one thing, he said. He told her about the frigid little ceremony that Catherine had forced him to go through on the same night every week. She hated it, but nothing would make her stop doing it. She used to call it, but you'll never guess. Our duty to the party, said Julia promptly. How did you know? I've been at school too, dear. Sex talks once a month for the over 60s. And in the youth movement. They rub it into you for years. I dare say it works in a lot of cases, but of course you can never tell. People are such hypocrites. She began to enlarge upon the subject. With Julia, everything came back to her own sexuality. As soon as this was touched upon in any way, she was capable of great acuteness. Unlike Winston, she had grasped the inner meaning of the party's sexual puritanism. It was not merely that the sex instinct created a world of its own which was outside the party's control and which therefore had to be destroyed if possible. What was more important was that sexual privation induced hysteria, which was desirable because it could be transformed into war fever or leader worship. The way she put it was, when you make love, you're using up energy, and afterward you feel happy and don't give a damn for anything. They can't bear you to feel like that. They want you to be bursting with energy all the time. All this marching up and down and cheering and waving flags is simply sex gone sour. If you're happy inside yourself, why would you get excited about Big Brother and the 3-year plans and the 2-minute hate and the rest of their bloody rot? So again, we have a new perspective. And a big thing is that since Winston's a little bit older and he vaguely remembers a time before the party, then we kind of just get his POV as in it wasn't always like this. But with Julia, since she was born and raised under the party, she has a better grasp of why everything is the way it is, because she was indoctrinated. That was very true, he thought, but there was no direct intimate connection between chastity and political orthodoxy. For how could the fear, the hatred, and the lunatic credulity which the party needed in its members be kept at the right pitch, except by bottling down some powerful instinct and using it as a driving force? The sex impulse was dangerous to the party, and the party had turned it to account. They had played a similar trick with the instinct of parenthood. The family could not actually be abolished, and indeed, people were encouraged to be fond of their children, in an almost old-fashioned way. The children, on the other hand, were systematically turned against the parents, and taught to spy on them and report their deviations. The family had become, in effect, an extension of the thought police. It was a device by means of which everyone could be surrounded night and day by informers who knew them intimately. Abruptly, his mind went back to Catherine. Catherine would unquestionably have denounced him to the thought police if she had not been too stupid to detect the unorthodoxy of his opinions. But what really recalled her to him at this moment was the stifling heat of the afternoon, which had brought the sweat out of his forehead. He began telling Julia of something that had happened, or rather had failed to happen, on another sweltering summer afternoon, 11 years ago. It was about 3 or 4 months after they were married. They had lost their way on a community hike somewhere in Kent. They had only lagged behind the others for a couple of minutes, but they took a wrong turning and presently found themselves pulled up short by the edge of an old chalk quarry. It was a sheer drop of 10 or 20 meters with boulders at the bottom. There was nobody of whom they could ask the way. As soon as she realized that they were lost, Catherine became uneasy. To be away from the noisy mob of hikers, even for a moment, gave her a feeling of wrongdoing. She wanted to hurry back by the way that they had come and start searching for another direction. But at this moment, Winston noticed some tufts and loose strife growing in the cracks of the cliff beneath them. One tuft was of 2 colors, magenta and brick red, apparently growing on the same root. He had never seen anything of the kind before, and he called to Catherine to come and look at it. "Look, Catherine, look at those flowers, that clump down there at the bottom. Do you see they're 2 different colors?" She had already turned to go, but she did rather fretfully come back for a moment. She even leaned out over the cliff the cliff face to see where he was pointing. He was standing a little behind her, and he put his hand on her waist to steady her. At this moment, it suddenly occurred to him how completely alone they were. There was not a human creature anywhere, not a leaf stirring, not even a bird awake. In a place like this, the danger that there would be a hidden microphone was very small. And even if there was a microphone, it would only pick up sounds. It was the hottest, sleepiest hour of the afternoon. The sun blazed down upon them, the sweat tickled his face, and the thought struck him. "Why didn't you give her a good shove?" said Julia. "I would have." "Yes, dear, you would have." "I would, if I had been the same person then as I am now. Or perhaps I would. I'm not certain." "Are you sorry you didn't?" "Yes. On the whole, I'm sorry I didn't." They were sitting side by side on the dusty floor. He had pulled her closer against him. Her head rested on his shoulder, the pleasant smell of her hair conquering the pigeon dung. She was very young, he thought. She still expected something from life. She did not understand that to push an inconvenient person over a cliff solves nothing. "Actually, it would have made no difference," he said. "Then why are you sorry you didn't do it?" "Only because I prefer a positive to a negative. In this game that we're playing, we can't win. Some kinds of failure are always better than other kinds. That's all." He felt her shoulders give a wriggle of dissent. She always contradicted him when he said anything of this kind. She did not accept it as a law of nature that the individual was always deafened. In a way, she realized that she herself was doomed, or that sooner or later the thought police would catch her and kill her. But with another part of her mind, she believed that it was somehow possible to construct a secret world in which you could live as you choose. All you need was luck and cunning and boldness. She did not understand that there was no such thing as happiness, that the only victory lay in the far future, long after you were dead, that from the moment of declaring war on the party was better to think yourself as a corpse. "We are dead," he said. "We're not dead yet," said Julia prosaically. "Not physically. 6 months, a year, 5 years, conceivably. I am afraid of death. You are young, so presumably you're more afraid of it than I am. Obviously, we shall put it off as long as we can, but it makes very little difference. So long as human beings stay human, life and death are all the same." "Oh, rubbish. Which would you sooner sleep with, me or a skeleton? Don't you enjoy being alive? Don't you like feeling? This is me, this is my hand, this is my leg. I'm real, I'm solid, I'm alive. Don't you like this?" She twisted herself around and pressed her bosom against him. He could feel her breasts, ripe yet firm, through her overalls. Her body seemed to be pouring some of its youth and vigor into his. "Yes, I like that. Then stop talking about dying, and listen, dear. We've got to fix up and about the next time we meet. We may as well go back to the place in the wood. We've given it a good long rest, but you must get there by a different way this time. I've got it all planned out. You take the train, but look, I'll draw it for you." And in her practical way, she scraped together a small square of dust, and with a twig from a pigeon's nest began drawing a map on the floor. So, we're going to do the summary differently. So Winston, in his philosophy, is kind of more... Oh, I didn't spell that right. Oh, I cannot spell today. Winston is kind of portraying more of a nihilistic mindset, that it's like, we're going to die anyways. Like, we're dead. Canonically, we are dead. Whereas Julia is like, Why can't we enjoy the now? Why can't we enjoy this moment? Like, we're here right now. Let's get it on. Right? She's also... She spent her youth indoctrinated, whereas Winston spent his youth in the beginning of the war. So they're obviously, because of like their ages and everything, there are going to be differing opinions, but the big thing is that because she was indoctrinated, she has and she understands that like we can't be indoctrinated, or that she doesn't believe in the indoctrination now that she's older. She has a much fresher mindset than what Winston has. He's tired, he's old, he knows that like death is probably coming near because of the life expectancy of party members, whereas Julia is only 26 and she's like, you know what, I just want to live in the now. I think that everything's good. But that's basically it. This was sort of more of a compare and contrast chapter, because with their conversations, there's obviously differing opinions. I don't think that it's going to affect how they interact, but I definitely think that it's something to keep in mind when you keep reading this.